Hey everybody, it's me, Sam. I'm the worship director here at Ezra Church. I'm glad to be with you here today. Today it's me, we have Pastor Jeff, and we have Next Steps Director Kristen here with us. We're trying a little bit something different for the teaching today. Jeff's going to kind of give some more information on that in a little while, but I know that you might be a little nervous. You might be seeing this awkward camera angle that I have right now. I want to assure you, I'm not on the porcelain throne. I am on a standard office chair. I'm in an office. So we're gonna make it through without any of those shenanigans. As we kind of take in this new format, we just kind of want to take a moment to recognize that it's new, to recognize that we're doing something different. And Jeff just is going to give a little bit of a look into what that new process is going to look like and cast a little vision on that.
Thanks, Sam. Well, I love my church, and that's never been more true than right now. What is really true about that is it's just a great reminder that church has never been about a building or a gathering of rows or an organization. The church is people. The church is a community of people seeking God together, and that's still who we are. We're still a Jesus-focused community that loves people. And even though we can't be together in a big group or gathering in rows today, we're still the church. Jesus is still with us. And so this is one way we're trying to continue being who we are in a new way. Our goal with this living room experience isn't just to duplicate whatever we were doing on Sunday morning, but to try to find new ways to grow our connection with God. In a time when it's pretty common to be socially isolated, we want to see it as an opportunity to grow in spiritual intimacy. We want to use this as a way to keep our conversation going as a church family, to connect with one another in new ways, and to help each of us, to help you grow in your connection with God. We all long to be back together. I can't wait for the day when we're back together, but now is the opportunity to engage in some new ways, to grow in your own intimacy with God, to find new ways to engage and connect in community. If you're part of a Ezra circle or small group, definitely lean into connecting with those folks and continuing a conversation there. Reach out to your neighbors and friends. That's where the engagement is happening right now. And someday we'll be back together again, and that'll be exciting too. In the meantime, just continue with us, continue being a part of your community, continue in generosity. Your generosity continues to make a difference. Thank you for those of you who are supporting us and helping make all this happen. Continue being the church. So before we dive in, I just want to take a moment and invite you to connect with us online. You can follow us on Facebook or Instagram. There's a place below to share a connection card with us, or any comments or prayer requests you can give online in the space below as well. So before we dive into our teaching, let's take just a moment to pause and to pray together. Will you pray with me? God, I'm so grateful that you are here with us, that even though we may be apart physically, we're near through the power of your Spirit, and that you are here with us. I pray that through this time together this morning, we might hear you, we might see you, we might experience you, and discover new things about who you are and who we are in connection with you. I pray for each person watching this, God, that they might sense your closeness to them. I thank you for the kids and the students that are joining us as well. God, you're at work. You're doing something new. Help us to be responsive and open and to seek you in new ways. God, lead us and help us to follow. Amen. With that, I'm going to hand it back to Sam.
Alrighty, so as we kind of get rolling today, we just kind of want to start by recognizing where we were talking last week. And we kind of started last week focusing on the idea of finding the words in this situation. We all know that we're going through different circumstances right now. Everyone's kind of reacting a little bit differently, and we all need to find words of how to explain our current circumstances and also just recognize God in these circumstances. So as we do that, we just want to kind of reflect on where we left off last week a little bit before getting into the psalm for this week. So I just want to start by asking Jeff and Kristen, what was your experience with kind of the message last week with the words that we suggested with how did you see or hear God in a new way, or what surprised you?
So my experience in this past week was that I didn't honestly feel like I saw or heard God in necessarily these new ways. What I noticed is that as I spent time with him, like as I was reading my Bible and just noticing what was happening there, that what continued to come up was this idea of God as a guide, that amidst all the chaos and the ups and downs and the difference and the things I was trying to navigate, that this comforting piece of God being our guide through it all. And that was really what I noticed in last week.
Yeah. I think one thing I noticed was that it felt like everything in my world was new last week. You know, everybody's working from home. My kids are running around, trying to figure out how to do a video sermon. All that kind of stuff is new and different and weird. And I was actually really happy to find that there wasn't a lot new about who God was. He was still the same, and that he still met me in ways that I had cultivated in the past. I'm grateful that God doesn't change, even when our circumstances change.
Yeah, I think I was kind of in a similar boat to you guys, where it's like just getting my feet wet a little bit with the new circumstances, and it wasn't seeing God necessarily in new ways, but just seeing him more in the ways that he's been faithful and good. So
because
as
you
we
are
continue,
a married guy now.
oh yeah, I forgot about that. That's weird.
Yeah, these guys haven't seen you
strange.
since you were married, so there you go. Congrats.
Yeah, so that, yeah, thank you. Yep, so that's a new thing, and that also comes with me being a stepdad now, so there's a few different layers to that. So as we kind of continue this week, we're going to be taking a look at Psalm 46. We're going to start just by looking at verses 1 through 3, and we're going to kind of chop it up and work our way through it as a group here. So verse 1 through 3, God is our refuge and strength, always ready to help in times of trouble. So we will not fear when earthquakes come and mountains crumble into the sea. Let the oceans roar and foam. Let the mountains tremble and as the waters surge. So Jeff, why don't we start with you? What kind of comes to mind when you hear those verses?
You know, I think as I look at those verses, so I just kind of pause with them. That first line jumps out to me that, you know, with everything that's going on, you know, it talks about the mountains crumbling, with the oceans roaring and foaming. All of that happens in the context of who God is. You know, he's still in charge. He's over it all. It doesn't mean that everything's good. Like I love that it doesn't try to pretend that everything's fine and good and awesome, but it kind of honestly acknowledges the trouble that we're facing. And yet, even in the midst of the trouble, who God is a place of refuge and strength. I don't know, Kristen, what do you think? What's important? I love how it talks about, you know, just it names the trouble and the problems that it's facing there. What do you think is important about that? Acknowledging the trouble that we face.
What I love about it and what I think is really important is that when we can acknowledge the trouble, when we can be really transparent and real about that, that's when we best are able to position ourselves to hear God speak. And that when he speaks, he's speaking right to the heart of what's truly going on with us. Like it kind of takes the mask or takes the walls down, and it creates this space where we can connect at a deeper relational level. So like there's honesty in that vulnerability, and again, opens the way for us to be more deeply relational.
Yeah, one thing I love about that is, like, you know, we can be honest with God, but in being honest with God as a community, we can be honest with each other about the troubles and challenges we face. You know, around Ezra, we talk about no perfect people allowed. That means that we all have our own story. We have our own struggles and needs that are going on. We all have our places of brokenness. And, you know, on a regular Sunday when we're gathered together in a big group, like all kinds of different needs walk in on any given day. And, you know, we invite that, we welcome that. That's part of who we are. And we all have a different story on days like that. But I think one thing that's true, like in this moment, is that there's this collective sense of need. There's more of a common story that we're all sharing in terms of brokenness and chaos, and that kind of unites us in a new way. I'm curious, Kristen, how you're experiencing that common sense of need right now.
I think it's everywhere, especially like in the time that I've been on social media and things like that and connecting with people, that there is just this common sense of need for comfort and for reassurance in this time, that the things that have been so predictable or expected, that it's kind of like the rug's been taken out from underneath all of us in different ways. And so there's just that like you named, that common need for comfort and reassurance and peace, because the anxiety level is just up for so many of us.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'm not immune to that fear or that anxiety. I think I'm generally a person of faith and opportunity and optimism, and yet in unfamiliar times, like I notice my fear, my anxiety goes up, and yet this psalm kind of says the point is to keep God in sight in that time, that we have a place to run. It talks a little bit about coming to him for refuge and strength. And then it says, so we will not fear. My version of writing that would be, but I'm still afraid. But I think the invitation there is when we feel fear, when we feel anxiety, remember that we have a place to go to. We have somewhere we can run. And when we're in that place, that's when the fear begins to take on a different perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think that's important to recognize because I think if we're honest, like these circumstances, like the circumstances are new and different for everybody, but like the problem isn't really a different problem. It's not a new need. It's not a new problem. Like fear and anxiety is something that people face all the time, but it's amplified right now because everyone's experiencing the same story. Everyone's kind of feeling the anxiety or the fear around the same thing. Even people that are kind of like they're confident and feeling good are still coming in contact with people that are feeling some fear and anxiety. So I think the big question is like, now that we are in this shared experience, how do we get beyond that fear, and how do we call each other up and out of that and into the goodness of God? Because verse 4-7 kind of show that there are better ways. So why don't we kind of move on to verses 4-7 here. It says, a river brings joy to the city of our God, the sacred home of the Most High. God dwells in that city and it cannot be destroyed. From the very break of day, God will protect it. The nations are in chaos and their kingdoms crumble. God's voice thunders and the earth melts. The Lord of heaven's armies is here among us. The God of Israel is our fortress. What kind of comes to mind to you guys as you hear those words?
One of the things that comes to mind for me is that it can be so easy amidst all the chaos when there's all these different things going on to forget who God is. And it can also be really easy to forget who we are in him amidst all of that chaos. And so this saying like he's offering a way through it. And again, it can just be so easy to miss that when we're caught up in all of the chaos.
Yeah, I think that the forgetting who God is, or forgetting who we are, or at least failing to remember what we know is true in those moments, when everything kind of, all the familiar stuff disappears, it's easy to lose a sense of identity of who we are and who God has reminded us to be. I think part of what helps me remember who I am is actually keeping in view who God is. And I think there's a lot about who God is in this psalm. And I'm curious, Kristen, what do you see about who God is even in these few verses?
What really stood out to me when I was reading them is his power, that he is powerful, that he is above all of it, and that he goes beyond all the things that are going on in the right now.
What about who we are in connection with him?
I think what stands out to me about who we are is that we're the ones who his attention is on. We're the ones who, as we're going through all of this, that he's attentive to, and that we can go to him for protection, that he's our place of refuge, that he's this fortress, this solid, when all this other stuff just seems to be unstable, that he remains the same.
Love that.
So how do you think like that perspective of recognizing how big God is, what like our identity in him, how does that make the difference?
I think like in verse 7 where it says he is here among us, like there's an us. This isn't just a me and God hiding in a corner kind of a thing, that like we're part of a church family. There's something God's doing in the world and we get to be a part of it. And when we go hide in a corner, it is easy for me to miss out. I think there's a sense in our world right now where, there's a temptation to duck and cover, right? And just, so that it's just a reminder to me that I can experience the best of who God is when it's not just me and God, but when I'm in community with others and stay connected.
There's a sense of just being able to move differently when there's something solid that you can cling to. there's just a sense of, okay, I may be feeling this, and yet this is who God is. He is with me, he is in me, and he's my protector. He's the one who is the fortress for me. And so if I have that, then that means I can move in this situation differently than if I were just going with the fear and the anxiety that can come up from the situation.
I think one thing I noticed there too is like in verse 4, it talks about there is a river, right? And I think most of us would say, if there's a river of blessing and joy that God has for me right now, like how do I get that river flowing in my direction? How do I have that? I want that in my life. I think the good news part of that is that there is a river. Sometimes it's hard to find, or we're not sure where to look for it, but it is a river that exists, that brings joy. I think what I notice as we study that part, it says that the river, we find it where God dwells, right? And where does God dwell? If we look throughout the scriptures, we see that God dwells with his people. It's not like he's hiding out there somewhere. Like this idea continues to follow through. Like we find God where we find his people, where we come together to seek him. God's at work among us. So we find joy, we find hope in the presence of God among his people, which makes me wonder, like even in a time of social distancing or whatever you want to call it, Kristen, how do people stay connected to each other, even as a church family?
I think there's lots of different ways practically, right? And it makes me think, I was reading on a friend's Facebook post who really flipped this idea of social distancing and called it distant socializing. So respecting the fact that there's this need for a distance, but intentionally closing that gap so that we are still together in different social ways. And so I think that it does require this higher level of intention, because we do have to remain distant. But I think that looks like being intentional in all the different areas where you are in touch with people typically, right? Like your family, your friends, your church, your community, and thinking about what are the ways that I can stay in touch with people. It may be that before I'd send a text and now I'm sending a phone or giving an actual phone call so that I can hear people's voices. It may look like I'm going to learn a new system so that I can look at someone's face and do a video chat, because there's a need to be able to see one another and connect in that way. So in all of it, I just think it requires that greater level of intentionality, and sometimes pushing ourselves beyond a comfort zone and doing things that we wouldn't typically do because the time calls for something different.
Yeah, just these verses are kind of starting that, showing like that reminder of, hey, the city of God is the place where God dwells, like that community that comes around to celebrate who God is, to remember what he's done. That's where he dwells, in those places, and nothing can come against him and come against that.
I think a lot of times people think that, if God is with us, then what can be against us, right? Like there won't be any problems, there won't be any chaos, or that like the people of God are somehow immune to that. But I think that while that's tempting, that really what we see in this passage even is that, God is with us in the chaos. The community of people are the people he gives us to get through it together. It's not that there isn't a chaos, it's that we have a different way to get through it than those around us.
So let's kind of keep carrying some of those thoughts as we continue on into verse 8 through 11. Let's kind of read those for us here. Come see the glorious works of the Lord. See how he brings destruction upon the world. He causes wars to end throughout the earth. He breaks the bow and snaps the spear. He burns the shield of fire. Be still and know that I am God. I will be honored by every nation. I will be honored throughout the world. The Lord of heaven's armies is here among us. The God of Israel is our fortress.
As you read that, one of the things I thought of was how we had talked about that spiritual practice from last week of noticing God at work. And when it says, "Come see the glorious work of the Lord."
How have you found that spiritual practice to be helpful for you?
And I would say, again, it's not necessarily something new, but it's something that I'm not always consistent with. And so I think the reminder to be paying attention to what God is doing and how he's working and what he's trying to say in those moments and in these moments is something that that has been more present for me.
Yeah. I've noticed that a lot of people are noticing, like even people that I wouldn't normally have spiritual God type conversations with. Like, and it's not, and partly that's being the pastor guy. Everybody tries to avoid those conversations with me, but also discover that a lot of people are just more open to that, and they bring it up, and try to notice what God is doing, or what does this all mean from a faith perspective right now. So, I'm just looking at those verses, and I also think, just to change the subject a little bit, I think verses 8 and 9, they seem weird to me. It's like, look at God's glorious work. Look at all he's destroying. And I think if we just take those verses out of if we take those verses out of context, it's like you can easily see how people get the wrong idea about it. But I actually love what the beautiful thing is that's going on there, because what he's destroying is the important part. He is destroying destruction. He's destroying war. He's destroying the weapons of war. He's destroying all the things that make the earth bad, and instead is making all things new. And so if anybody ever reads that verse to you and says, and takes it out of context, I think you can point them to the more beautiful thing that God's doing.
Right.
Yeah, it's kind of that, it supports that verse 10 spot of that, that be still and know that I am God.
Yeah.
So what invitation do you hear in that, Kristen? That idea of like recognizing how big God is, and then having it like punctuated with that verse, be still and know that I am God.
It brings me back to just our Be Here Now series that we did a little bit ago, when we had talked about the idea of just letting everything drop, that just taking the things that we're focusing on and turning away from those things and putting our focus on God, to know deeply who he is, and not just in a sense of like, okay, yeah, this is God, this is how he's described, but that relational knowing. So I'm intentionally like putting that stuff to the side, and I'm leaning into who he is and paying attention to notice what he is doing in my life, in our community, and knowing him at a relational level, really.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think one thing that I'm aware of, like even last week, we talked a little bit about embracing the pause, right? Like we all have had our schedules shifted a little bit right now, whether that's you have more to do or less to do. But so being still doesn't mean stop everything else. Like it doesn't mean your calendar suddenly empties so that you can notice God. Still isn't just about having nothing to do, but it's more about like allowing our soul to take a beat or have a moment to just pay attention and notice things in a different way.
Yeah, there's like this invitation, really specifically, like, meet with me because I want to meet with you. That is what I really hear in the be still and know.
Yeah. I'm thinking about like Jesus' invitation, like in John 10:10, there's there's a thief that will come and steal and kill and destroy. And I think, in this moment, right, we all are trying to seek God in new ways, but the temptation could be just to fill that up with all the things that aren't helpful, just to binge all your Netflix or to work harder right now. But I think Jesus, and that'll steal the opportunity, but Jesus says, but I've come to give you life to all its fullest. I wonder what does that opportunity look like from how you would see it, Kristen? Like what happens if we don't embrace this moment?
I think if we don't embrace it, we get swept up, and we can be honestly like pulled to things that aren't going to be helpful or good for us because of the fear and the anxiety that's in the situation. Or, for those of us who this has meant extra work or digging in a little bit more into some things, it could be getting lost in all of that and not having the solid anchor. It could mean losing the sight of the things that are really going to feed our souls rather than tire them.
Yeah, I think that's good. And I think something that it leaves me wondering though is also the idea, like we're kind of talking about the people who have way more time than they know what to do with. They're probably kind of scrambling to figure out, what am I going to do now that like I can't do all these other things I'm used to doing. But I also think that there are people experiencing the exact opposite, where their life is busier than ever right now, is in like whether they're working in healthcare, or they're working like as police officers or what have you, just like in those kind of like frontline things that can't stop, that are really at a high need right now. Like what do we, how does this kind of like reach that spot? Because no matter what circumstances you are, you still have to kind of find a way to find a rhythm and be still.
That's good. I think that's an important question. I think one thing I'm aware of is that the thing that's true for all of us right now is that our world has been disrupted, right? That all of us are out of rhythm. That whatever we knew as normal before isn't what's happening. We're either working more or working less. And so the thing we all need right now is a way to find our way through the disruption. And, you know, one spiritual practice that generations and generations of Jesus followers have found helpful is something called a rule of life or a rhythm of life. In fact, that's like the kind of spiritual practice we want to suggest this week. And you can find more information about it down below this in the living room experience. But it's an idea of finding a rhythm through the disruption. How do we build in intentionally the things that are life-giving and God-seeking, rather than just allowing, you know, the constant tide of the news or activity to sweep over us, but finding ways to build a rhythm that brings us things that are helpful. Some examples of those type of rhythms, like there's actually 10 different ideas on the list in the spiritual practice below, but, you know, things like just being sure we pause for prayer and scripture at some point in the day, whether that's to start your day with it or end your day with it or make points along the way. One thing that's been really helpful for me is actually what's called, one focal practice. Like find something that just demands my undivided attention, because my brain is going usually in about a million different directions at once, and I have a hard time, focusing, and that ups my anxiety. So finding something that I can do and actually for us, a lot of times it's just look like playing a game with my kids. I just need to be here and pay attention to that. Or, I planted a bunch of flower seeds in my basement, things that just demand my attention for a little period of time. Those things, by being intentional with it, I think that helps us to become more of who we say we want to be. So what else? What else do you guys see in this psalm?
Personally, for me, I really like how the psalm ends. So I'll just go ahead and read it because it ends with this beautiful promise. It says, "I will be honored by every nation. I will be honored throughout the world. The Lord of heaven's armies is here among us. The God of Israel is our fortress."
I think there's a lot of certainty in those verses. I will, he is, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think they're like in these circumstances like these, with like this virus going around, and just with life circumstances in general, when things kind of get tossed up, it's important to be able to have those like to recognize those promises and lean in on just like God saying like, this is how it's going to be, like regardless of all the outside circumstances, I will be honored. I will be honored. I will be with you, like that. Those are like solid foundational promises that we can hold on to and hold dear and hold close.
Yeah. So
when it comes to like finding the words this week, like I think that's part of it. Like part of like remembering those promises is about finding the right words to help us remember them. So what do you think we should try this week, or what plan do you guys have for us to try this week?
I would say let's try these words this week. Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am God. And even just taking a moment, I've been using those words this week, just in the form of breath prayer, or just as a moment of just in the scramble of my day, just to let those words remind me of who God is and that he's with us. I think really it comes back to, if you go with be still, that's about pausing, right? Just pause for a moment. And know, that's about remembering. What are we supposed to remember? We're supposed to remember who God is and who we are in connection with him. And then I think the trick is to live like that's true, right? To live like who God says we are is who we are, and that he's in control, and that that's enough, that he is with us. The God of heaven's armies is here among us. He's our fortress. He's our refuge. Yeah. Well, if you've been watching and joining us online today, I'd love to invite your comments down below, or invite you to continue the discussion with those you're gathering with. There's some questions down below as well. Before we head out, I'd love to take a moment and just pray together. Will you pray with me? God, again, we pause and just recognize that you are here with us, that you are the God who commands all of heaven's armies, that there's nothing beyond your control, and that even in the midst of the chaos of our world and nation and our health crisis, God, we invite you to make your way known, to help us to hear your voice, to see you at work, to rally to community together. God, I pray that you will calm our fears, that you'll be a place of refuge and strength for each of us this week. For those whose world is more chaotic than ever, maybe they're on the front lines of healthcare or serving others in need, maybe they work at a grocery store right now, I pray, God, that you would be a sense of peace and hope and comfort for them. For those whose life is slower than they've expected it to be, we invite you to meet with them in that place, that you would help them to grow a sense of intimacy and connection with you. God, thanks that you're here with us. Help us to know you more. We pray this in the name of your son, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. So thanks again, everybody, for joining us. We're glad to be able to do this with you. And I think we start off where Jeff said, we just have this opportunity to just live with intention and to be able to lean in. And, you know, it's about going from isolation and using isolation to allow us to grow in intimacy with God. And there's just a real opportunity there that we can take hold of if we can use these words and not get distracted by the chaos around us, but remember who God is and who we are in him. So we're thankful to have you with us. We're constantly praying for you guys, and we look forward to talking to you again next week. So have a good one.